When it comes to picking the right tech stack for your next project or building modern web apps in general, JavaScript frameworks are super popular right now because of the modular style of coding and the better user experience that it provides. Now, there are a lot to choose from. For example, you have React.js, you have Angular, and of course, Vue.js, which is becoming increasingly popular every day. However, if you look at the trends, React is definitely the best language for you to learn right now, simply because there are a lot of jobs in the industry for React developers right now. Regardless if you want to be a full stack developer or specialize in front end, React is definitely a great tool to have in your skill set. Once you've learned and started working with React, after a while, I'm certain that a few things that you're going to be looking at is how to do server-side rendering with React, and also how to implement things like Redux or GraphQL. Now, in this video tutorial, I want to introduce you to a really great open source project called React Starter Kit, and I'm going to post a link to this website directly in the description of this video. Now, this is an open source project hosted on GitHub, and it's really the easiest way for you to set up a universal React Redux GraphQL web app. I'm also going to show you in this video how to deploy it on Heroku. Now, before we dive into this tutorial, I just want to take a moment to show you two things. Now, if you navigate over to our website, which is of course reactstarterkit.com, there'll be a link in the description of this video. You're going to find two links on our landing page. The first is to source code, and if I click on that, it's going to take you to our GitHub repository where we host this project. You can go through the code on here. You can also look at the README file and the documentation that we've provided, which is also quite in-depth. And of course, the other link that we have on our landing page is to the demo, which I already have open here. Now you're going to notice that we ship this with a theme already built in and ready to go, but you can customize this as much as you want. It is also very useful for you to understand because we've implemented quite a few things into this just to show you how easy it is for you to get up and running with your projects. So for example, if we go to services, you're going to notice that we have page transitions implemented. We also on the About page have implemented a responsive carousel. So if I actually resize this in my web browser, you're going to notice we switched to 2 items, and then on mobile we have 1 item. And if I expand this back onto desktop, then of course we have 4 again. If I come back over into the contact page, you're going to notice that we have implemented Redux Forms, so this actually has proper validation. We are also using Node Mailer that will actually handle processing the sending of the email on the Node server. Now, as I mentioned previously, this also comes with a complete implementation of Redux, and of course this is all server-side rendered. But we also have implemented a blogs page where basically we are fetching from a CMS posts, and of course you can click through and actually access those post detail pages where we are pulling all this information from an API. And of course this is all server-side rendered, so if I was to right click view page source, you're going to see that all the content is rendered on the server. Now, in a previous video tutorial that we did on React.js, I introduced you to the basic fundamentals of React. I showed you how to use Create React App to create your first single page application using React. I showed you how to create components, how to set up routing. However, what I didn't do was I didn't introduce you to Redux. I didn't show you server-side rendering. Now, I just want to explain what server-side rendering is in case there's anyone that's watching this video that isn't really sure what I'm referring to. So what I've done is I've used Create React App, which is something provided from Facebook. It's like a seed project. It's very popular. So often a lot of people, when they're first learning React, will use Create React App. But generally, it's not that good for production. The reason is it doesn't have server-side rendering. So what does that mean? So what I've done is I've downloaded, I've installed the CLI for Create React App. I've run it on my machine. I'm now running this on my local host. And this is just what it ships out. Now I'm going to just show you really quickly. If I take this text that I see here within my browser, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say inspect. Now what you're going to notice is that, of course, the text is here, right? So you can see it, there it is, and everything is loaded into this root div, okay, this div with an ID of root. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this text, okay, and I'm going to right click on this page and say view page source. And then I'm going to do Command F, which is going to do a search for that text. And what you're going to see immediately is that it does not exist. I get 0 matches. And the reason is because this is not server-side rendered, which means that the server doesn't wait for any scripts to initialize, or a bundle to initialize, or a fetch, or an asynchronous call, of course. It doesn't wait for that. It just throws down the initial HTML. And then what happens is, because JavaScript runs on the client, this page will be rendered by the browser. It'll hit the script tag, which is basically going to execute the bundle, and then it's going to run on the client. So if we come back to this div with the ID of root, which everything is kind of populated inside of, there's nothing here. Now the impact of this is massive for things like search engine optimization, because if you look at search engines like Google, when they crawl your website, it isn't going to wait for content to be rendered. It's going to look at your page and it's going to see that it has no content, and it's going to leave, which means that effectively Google and other search engines are going to think that your websites are blank. It has zero content. It's not going to see any links or any text, and you can understand very quickly how that's going to impact your business and your clients' businesses. Now, what I want to do is I want to come back over to React Starter Kit. I want to go over to our demo, and I just want to go to a page that has some content. Let's say the About page. So I'm just going to right click here and say View Page Source, and immediately you're going to see this is a fully server-side rendered application, and it is server-side rendered out the box. You're not going to have to do any more work to implement this. It's going to be super easy, and I'm going to show you exactly how it works right now. Okay, so let's get started. The very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder on my desktop, and I'm just going to call this, I can call this anything. Okay, I'm going to call it My New Web App. Okay, you can call this anything. It can also be anywhere on your computer, wherever you want to host your website. Now, I'm also going to assume that you have command line tools installed for Git. If you're not familiar with that, then again, please come over to reactstarterkit.com. There'll be a link in the description of this video. Click on the source code option, and as part of the README file, I actually go through some really useful links here, and one of them is actually to install Git command line tools. Of course, you're going to need Node installed as well. This is for things like npm. It's also going to be, of course, this is a Node app, so you're going to need it to actually run it on your system. And of course, it's optional, but I'm going to encourage you to download Yarn. It's just a much nicer package manager. And of course, I'm also going to be using VS Code. That's my preferred web editor. You can use anything that you like. There's absolutely no reason why you can't use a different one. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate inside this folder here within terminal or CMD. So to do that on Mac, I'm just going to say CD, which stands for change directory. I'm going to drag the folder into my terminal window and click return. And I'm now inside of this folder within my terminal. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this clone link on the repository, and I'm just going to copy it. Now, the one thing I'd just like to take a moment here and encourage you to do is actually fork this repository. Now, if you're not familiar with what that means, what it actually means is if you have a GitHub account of your own, it will actually make a complete clone of this entire repository, but it will be hosted within your GitHub account, which means that you're going to be able to push your changes to your repository, which is going to be a great, versioning for you in terms of being able to commit work so I'm just going to assume that you've done that, but you need to get that clone link regardless. And I'm just going to come back to my terminal here, and I'm just going to say git clone and paste that URL, click on return, and it's going to clone that into my folder on my local. So if I just come back over here, you're going to see immediately a new folder is being created. That is my starter kit. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to change directory again, and I'm just going to go and navigate inside of this file. So if I come inside here and I list everything inside, you can see that there's quite a lot in here. What I need to do, and I'm just going to show you quickly. So what I've done is I've just opened up this folder in VS Code. And these are the files, okay, for the project. And if I open up the package.json file, you're going to see that, of course, these are the dependencies that we need to install. So to install them, I'm just going to come back to my terminal window. I'm using yarn. You can use npm. It's up to you. I'm just going to yarn install. And this might take a while, depending on your internet connection. You just need to allow this to run, and once it has, I'm going to come back and just to save some time, I'm going to pause the video, come back once this is installed. Now, before I can execute a build of my app, I just need to come through to the web config JSON file in the root of my directory. And I just want to check that the site URL is set to localhost 3000. Now this is, of course, the URL that I'm going to be running this on my local host. Now I just need to remember whenever I deploy this, I need to change this to my live URL, my live website. Because what this site URL is going to be used for is site-wide anywhere in our project where we reference a file, for example, our bundles, or even within our source code where we reference images. All of those URLs are going to be prefixed with this site URL. So, unless we want a bunch of 404s not found, we need to make sure that before we deploy or before we run this on our local environment, we need to make sure that we set this correctly to either localhost, or we need to set this to our live environment. Now, of course, I want to run this on my machine, so setting this to localhost 3000 is correct for what we want to do. I'm going to come back to this in just a second, but all I need to do now, as you can see, is just come over to my terminal, yarn run build, and that's going to create an initial build of our app that we can run on our local host. So I'm just going to let this run, and then I'm going to come back. Okay, so this is run, and as you can see, if we look at our folder, we now have a build folder, and that's actually our code compiled. So all I need to do now is just say yarn run dev and return. And that is going to set up a watch on those files, and it's also going to make this run on port 3000 as we have defined. Okay, so I get it. I'm just waiting for a message to return, which tells me it's running on port 3000. So I can come over and access that. And as you can see on port 3000, we are running the app, which is actually the same as what you saw on the demo. However, you can see this is now running on my local machine. So of course I have access to all the code. I can go through the pages. So of course you have the about page, contact, services, the blog. And of course this is actually fetched dynamically using GraphQL from a CMS. And you can actually click through the details pages. And again, this is more, this kind of shows you, how advanced this is and how much it actually does out the box. So I just want to take you through some of the files. Now, I just want to say that the point of this tutorial is not actually to show you how to develop a new website. We're going to be creating a whole series of tutorials that goes through the starter kit piece by piece. We'll break it down into sections. So for example, creating new pages, how to use SCSS, how to send emails, how to use Redux Form, etc. These are all things that are covered in the documentation. These are also things that you don't need us to show you. If you already know how to use, for example, Redux Form, or maybe you want to do something custom with the app, then by all means download the source code and feel free to change it as you wish. But of course, in this tutorial, what I wanted to do was to introduce you to the starter kit, just give you a quick overview of how the code works, and then deploy it so that you get an idea of what the starter kit can do and what it can do for you and your projects. So before we move on to deployment, what I just want to show you is just take you through the code and some of the other parts. So for example, if we go into the source folder, you're going to see that we have 3 folders and 1 file. Now that 1 file is our server file. This actually this is where we configure our node server. So for example, this is an Express app, so we're creating an instance of our app, and then we're doing various things with that. Now I don't want to go into this part of the code right now because it would be way too soon. As I said, we are going to create tutorials on it. But then again, of course, if you already understand those things like node, etc., then by all means you can dive into that code. I also want to say that you don't need to. Okay, this is already done for you out the box. There's no reason for you to actually have to do any of that stuff. It's just if you want to. It is an optional thing. So I'm going to come back here and just explain this. So of course we have an assets folder. I think this is very self-explanatory. In here we have a graphics folder. Of course we keep our images in various assets such as that. We have email templates. As I mentioned before, if you look at the demo or what we have running on our localhost now, if you go to the contact form, we've implemented Redux Form. So if you're interested in actually looking at the implementation of it, you can actually use this as a great learning tool as well. But this is the email template that is used to actually send that email. Okay, so we actually have email templates built in to this starter kit as well. And of course we have an SCSS folder. So SCSS is a CSS preprocessor. It's a great way of creating more reusable, cleaner CSS. But of course you can go through these files. This is broken down into, of course, partial files. So we have partial files for pages, components. We have a whole load of base styles that are configured. And of course, these are all called in one styles.scss, where we just call those partial files. This is not only compiled into standard CSS, it's minified and various things like that. So other than the assets folder, we have a client folder. In here is where we really have the code for our application. So if you're familiar with Redux, and again, you don't have to be, we have a full Redux implementation, so you can go through. We have an actions file where we're exporting our actions. We have a common folder where we're exporting code that's shared across the app, so things like form validation and inputs. for Redux Form, for example. We have a components folder. This is for things like the header and footer. Generally, these are components that are not connected to your store. We have a layouts folder, so we also support having multiple layouts. So when you're defining your routes, you can define a kind of layout component for that route to be rendered into, and you can create as many as you want. We have a pages folder, and these are basically very simple. These are our page components, and of course I'm going to come back to this in just a second. Of course, we also have reducers. Again, if you're familiar with Redux, this is going to make a lot more sense to you. But again, this is things that we're going to come back to. We're going to create tutorials on, and we're going to teach you how to use this. Again, if you're already familiar and comfortable with this, then you don't even, you can actually just jump right into this code, and it's just already the initial architecture is already laid out for you, which is going to be super helpful. And of course, here we have app.js, where we are actually, this is kind of our master or default layout, you can imagine. We also, of course, have our routes file, and this is where we're just defining our routes. Okay, so at this point, what I want to do is actually show you how to deploy this onto a live server. So the easiest way to deploy modern web apps is using a service called Heroku. So this can be free, or you can pay for a more superior plan. I'm going to deploy this as a free web app, and of course this is something that you can do and copy along with. So of course all you have to do is come over to heroku.com. I'm going to post a link to that in the description of the video, and all you have to do is of course sign up to create a free account. Now I already have an account, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in. Okay, so once you have logged in, all you need to do is go over to your dashboard, click on this drop down, and click on Create New App. So let's just put in a random name here. So I'm just going to say React Tut Vid. That's available. You can call this anything that you want. And of course, choose your region. I'm based in the UK, so I'm going to select Europe. And I'm going to just go ahead and click on Create App. Okay, so that's created our app, and I can come over here and click on Open, and that's just going to show me this is my URL. It's also just going to show me that there's nothing here. So we want to deploy our app to this URL. I'm going to come back over here, and if we are in deploy, which is by default, it is going to show you how to do it and actually just give you some instructions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back over to my terminal window. And of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, log in within my terminal window to Heroku. Now again, you're going to need to install the Heroku command line tools to follow along. Now, if you're actually within the deployment tab on Heroku, there is a link to download the Heroku CLI. So I'm just going to assume that you have done that. And once you have, it's going to give you access to these additional commands like Heroku login. So I'm just going to copy that into my terminal window, click on return, and it's going to ask me for login details. So for interests of security, I have logged in and paused the video and logged in. I am now logged in my terminal window. So all I need to do is actually basically set a remote repository. Okay, so I basically need to tell Heroku that I want to connect my local repository with this remote repository that has been created by Heroku for the app that I just created. So I'm just going to paste in this a line that is provided to me from Heroku. I literally just copied and pasted it. Now again, I'm just going to say git push Heroku master. And when I do that, it's going to automatically deploy my app. So it's going to take a while because it has to go through and actually not only upload the files, but it needs to look at the package.json file, and it needs to actually install all of those dependencies. But it's not all it's going to do. And this is just something that I really want to explain at this point, because it's something that can take a while for people to understand how it all works. So if we actually look at our project here, and I just collapse everything down, what you're going to find is that if we look, for example, at our git ignore file here, we have included basically the build and node modules. Okay, so what this means is that when we actually upload our code to the server, it isn't going to include the build folder or the node modules folder. So as you noticed, when this terminal was running, I just explained that it's installing those dependencies. So it's actually capable, when we upload, to actually understand that it needs to install those dependencies on the server. The next thing is that the build. Okay, so it's generally good practice never to commit a build folder. What we've done in the package.json file is I've included an additional script. Okay, so Heroku have a script that it checks for every time that it finishes installing those dependencies. And that script's got a case sensitive, a specific name, which is Heroku-post build. And this is a command that it will execute every single time if it exists. You don't have to do this with your apps. But if it exists, it will look for this. If it finds it, it will execute this command. And if you noticed, I'm executing the exact same command as I'm executing for the build. So I'm effectively running a build of my app every time I deploy it. Okay, so that's really, really important to understand how that build process works. Cool, so if I come back over to my app, you're going to notice that it finished and it successfully deployed. So I'm going to come back over now to my Heroku dashboard and click on Open App again. Now you're going to notice that it has successfully deployed, but this definitely doesn't look anything like what was on my local machine. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to inspect with DevTools and try and figure out why this happened. So I'm going to come over to my console and you're going to see that I'm getting a bunch of errors. Basically, it's a bunch of 404s. So let me see. For example, the logo, it didn't work. Let's go to inspect and see why. Okay, hopefully it's pretty clear. I wanted this to happen because I really wanted to show you why it's so important to remember to update the site URL. So this is on live, but these URLs are prefixed with localhost 3000. Of course, that doesn't exist. So why did that happen? Well, let's come back over to our editor and let's go straight into our web config JSON file. We deployed this, but we forgot to update that site URL. So everything got prefixed with localhost, but it's on live. So it basically doesn't match. And I'm just going to replace this. I'm going to remove that / and save it. Okay, so you're going to see that this is updated. I'm then going to come back over to my terminal. Let's just clear that down and do git status. And you're going to see that it's detected that we've changed that web config file. So I'm just going to do git add. And when I do, you're going to see that if I do git status, it's added. So I'm going to do git commit, and I have to append a message. Just going to say update config file, and then git push Heroku master. And that's just going to redeploy our app to our website. It has to go through the entire process of building the dependencies and running the build. But once that's done, I'm going to come back. Awesome. So that just finished deploying. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to refresh. and you're going to see that now it is now working. So if I actually come back here to the image, for example, and I go inspect element, you're going to notice that these URLs are now prefixed with the proper URL, and it is now working. So the reason I did that was deliberate. I just wanted to make sure that you guys understand what I meant by that and what it is. I also wanted to show you how you can deploy this to a live environment and how it works. I'd just like to take this opportunity to encourage you to rate our GitHub project. It is an open source project and your support will go a long way. To do that, please just star this project. I really would appreciate that. Of course, please do like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future videos. I'd also like to just encourage you to visit our official web development community at simpletut.com. This is where we post all of our video tutorials, some on Angular and React, so I'm sure there's going to be some relevant material on the site. But of course, any questions, as I said, any questions, please do post that on here or our official Facebook page. Or I'd also like to ask you to like our official Facebook page. Of course, this is a great way to stay connected with us, get consistent updates when we release new tutorials and videos, etc. So please do. Thank you very much for following with this video tutorial. I hope you find it useful and can use this as your future projects.